This podcast is available at all main streaming platforms. Follow YourAccess on social media at YourAccess Online.
We can always improve. We can always get better. Take your access for the best. Listen to this podcast. YourAccess.
Today, you'll listen to the conversation I had with Felipe Pan, the mentor of the course YourAccess to Comic Books, available at youraccess.online. He is a dear friend and the author of the books Alec Dini, Rede dos Sonhos, and some others yet to be released. He is a great writer and a teacher at one of the biggest schools of São Paulo. You'll have the opportunity to listen to him speaking about his inspiration to write some of his books, strategies to writing, and some curiosities. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Felipe. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
So, you have worked on two pretty, from what I could see, well-known books. So, let's first talk about Alec Dini, which I've actually read, I guess a trial that you gave me a while back.
I remember that. I still have the manuscripts with your notes on it. It's I still have that.
Yeah, I really like that book. I think it's inspired by Celtic mythology. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. So back in 2012, I think, I decided to write a book based on mythology because I've always been a huge fan of mythology and I like studying mythology. And at the time, I thought, well, maybe I can write a book about Brazilian mythology. The problem was that a year before that, I think in 2011 or maybe 2010, another Brazilian author, also named Felipe, had already written, I think, one or two books of his own trilogy, which was based on Brazilian mythology. So I thought, well, I can't do that anymore, right? And basically, I thought, well, using Greek mythology might not be the right way because we have Rick Riordan with his books, which are hugely popular. And we also actually have lots of books based on Norse mythology and Roman mythology and Egyptian mythology. Some of those books written by Rick Riordan as well. I thought, why not tackle something a bit different that people don't know? So maybe working with Celtic mythology might be the right way. Because I had always been a fan of Arthurian mythology and Arthurian lore. And whereas King Arthur itself, himself, the legend, is quite known, Celtic mythology or the Celtic traditions behind Arthurian legends are not well known at all. So we might know a few names from video games, like we have in The Legend of Zelda, for example, we have his horse, which is called Epona, and Epona was actually a Gaulish goddess. So I thought, why not use this type of mythology on my books? That's what inspired me, and then I started to do my research. It was a really long process. I haven't finished yet because I'm still working on the story, Alec's story, right? In another format now because it's become a comic book series. So yeah, it's been wonderful and I've been working really hard on it as well.
Well, that's great. I really, especially at the age where I first received that, like, trial, I guess, of your book, I was really into mythology. Like, I just absolutely loved it. And it wasn't even just, like, those popular mythology books, you know, like Rick Riordan's, like his Percy Jackson series, that's extremely well known. It was, like, I was first introduced to it, by then, but then after a while, I started reading, like, actual mythology, like, I guess encyclopedias or something. And then, yeah, even more, story books, like, for example, Alec Dini and stuff like that. So, I was really interested in that book that you gave. So,
and it was really important for me because as I was writing for a middle grade audience and I was writing in English, I thought, well, I need to have someone tell me his thoughts about the first chapters at least, so that I can know I'm in the right track. And it was really useful. I ended up using all of your notes, all of your suggestions. So thank you.
Cool. Well, so with the whole inspiration of certain mythology and things like that, were there any certain mythology books that kind of inspired you, that you added into your own story? Like, not just mythology itself, but other writers that made stories like yours, like Rick Riordan and things like that, you know?
Yeah, well, the world of Alec's story, which is now, back then it was called Alec Dinney and the Vortex of Time, but now the comic book series is actually entitled Triskel. So the world of Alec's story, the world of Triskel, is based on mainly two books, right? The first of which is a book called The Great Kings of Britain, which was published back in the 12th century by a guy named Geoffrey of Monmouth. And the other book is actually a collection of tales called the Mabinogion, which is a collection of 11 or 12 tales, Welsh, or typically Welsh, right? And they relate somehow to Arthurian mythology. Some of them relate to Arthurian mythology. Others just relate to goddesses and gods from Welsh mythology, which ends up being Celtic mythology as well. So my work is mainly inspired by these two. My world building, at least, is inspired on these two pieces. And in terms of writing style, I can't say Rick Riordan was my main inspiration, because when I got to read Rick Riordan, I was already a writer. So I guess that in that sense, T.H. White and J.K. Rowling have had a bigger impact on my writing style, especially J.K. Rowling, because my passion for Harry Potter is what got me to start writing in the first place. I'm not going to get into everything that has surrounded J.K. Rowling's figure lately, because she has been involved in a lot of controversial topics and opinions. But in terms of writing style and in terms of the atmosphere that she created in the Harry Potter books, that was my main inspiration. Having characters that the readers could relate to very easily, and having a fantastic world around them was my main inspiration. And also the sense of danger that she's able to convey in her stories, I think, is really unique when it comes to middle grade / YA fiction. So that I guess I can say that. But also I wanted to bring something a bit more poetic, in some aspects of the book and also the comic book series. That's why I mentioned T.H. White has been very influential in my work, and also a little bit of Neil Gaiman. I studied Neil Gaiman's prose, especially for his middle grade and YA books, and definitely inspired me on my writing.
Yeah, those are really great writers and authors that really impacted writing on like various scales, especially J.K. Rowling. Like, no matter the controversy, her writing was almost impeccable, you know?
Absolutely. I still think, like, I still have very fond memories of reading The Prisoner of Azkaban, for example, and I remember everything I felt when I was reading those books. And it was funny because maybe like 9 years ago, I got to read the Harry Potter books again in English, and I was afraid of not enjoying them as much. I thought, well, maybe these are books which are just for kids and they don't age well. So let's see. But then I got to read the first one, and then I was like, no, this has aged relatively well, I think. So I got to the second and the third, and then I was like, yeah, this has aged really well, actually. They're really fun books to read even today, even my age right now. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for her as a writer.
Yeah, I was actually surprised when I went to my local library to find that the Harry Potter books were all in the like juvenile section for like 8-year-olds and things like that, you know? So then, branching off to Rede dos Sonhos, what would you say were inspirations for that book? It's a different genre, I'm pretty sure. Were there the same writing style inspirations and same like storytelling inspirations, or were they sort of like at a different age in your lifetime, if you understand what I'm saying?
No, yeah, definitely. I think maybe a little bit of J.K. Rowling, bled into it. But at the time, I was just starting as a writer, and I wanted to make something which was dynamic and fun and funny, and also had a sense of adventure. But my character was a little older than Alec. For instance, Alec is 12, 13 years old, and the main character in Rede de Sonhos was actually a 17-year-old boy about to graduate from high school. So I tried to include a bit of romance into it. The book was set in Sao Paulo, so he faced problems that every typical Paulista or Paulistano ends up facing, such as having to go through the whole process of the our SATs, which are vestibulares, right? But this is what I wanted to bring that sense into the book. And but I guess my main inspiration was also like superhero comics and superhero TV shows. I remember at the time I was writing, there was this show called Heroes, which I absolutely loved. Again, at the time, I don't think it has aged very well at all. and apart from the first season, the rest is barely watchable. But I remember that at the time I was really enjoying it, and I was really an amateur writer. So I grabbed onto everything within my reach in order to find my own style. So I was still struggling to find my own style when I wrote that book. I was really proud of it at the time, and I got really positive feedback for it as well. But then I as soon as I finished, as soon as the whole book process finished, about a year after it, I started looking at my work more critically. And I started to understand I needed to evolve as a writer in terms of my style. I saw and I understood that I would need to study harder the craft of writing, right? Which I hadn't done very much. I wrote that book purely on instinct, I can say, right? I was like, okay, I have an idea. I think I have good characters. I have some references and I have my inspiration for it. So let's go. Without having studied the craft of writing much per se. So that was actually my turning point, I think. That's when I started looking at writing more seriously than I had before.
Especially with things like school assignments, I always found it like, in writing assignments like essays and things like that, I always found it like a drag to go through this entire process that people usually say helps your writing and things like that, when I can just go on instinct. And it generally gives me things that could have been better if I actually went through the entire process, you know?
Yeah, definitely, because I was just like you. I was like, if I have an idea and I want to write, I'm just gonna write. And I think that's good. I think that's really good. But we also have to keep in mind that there are strategies which will help us and make our text better. It's like getting feedback. You know, when you get a piece of feedback that when somebody tells you whatever your work is, somebody says, well, I like your work, it's good, and it has potential, but you must see that your work lacks this, and that. If you decide to just ignore the person, you're not going to grow as a writer or as any professional, right? So feedback is extremely important in this sense, right? And of course, I'm not talking about destructive feedback, like, oh, your work sucks, period. That's not feedback, right? That's just somebody grunting. But if we have someone saying, look, I did not enjoy the book because, well, maybe the characters weren't really relatable. Well, that's something I can work on, definitely, right? If my characters aren't relatable, that means I failed something extremely important in my book. So I have to study the craft of making relatable characters. How can I make them more relatable? How can I make the public like them? So this is essential to not only to a writer, but I think to every professional, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. In something where you're basically serving other people, you always need like constructive feedback to like thrive and make yourself like better, you know, go up to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I find wonderful about writing comic books is that as I get to work with an artist, I get prompt feedback all the time, right? Because I write down my ideas, I write down each panel, and each dialogue, each caption. and I get a response from my artist, right? Because he also knows how to write. So he tells me, well, is this the best way to go? Because it seems a little off, or I don't think the character would actually say that. So I get this prompt feedback, which is essential and which really helps me out. And it's a two-way street in the sense that when he comes up with the art, I can also give him feedback. So for instance, right at the beginning of our comic book, there's this panel which shows the main character's cottage, right? He lives in a white clay cottage, and the artist had drawn this window made of glass. But our story takes place in what would be medieval times, which means window glasses would be insanely expensive, and only the upper class would have it, right? And that's something I told them. I was like, hey, why don't we switch this glass window? Why don't we switch it to a wooden window? Because then it would make more sense. And he was like, yeah, that's great. I'm sorry I didn't think of that. So that's why feedback is so important, right? We contribute to one another's work. And that's the magic of making comics, I think, right? You get to experience that right away. You have someone you share your stories with and you share your art with. And way before it actually gets published. It's a pretty neat process.
Yeah, having like someone that directly works with you that can already give you that like help that you need with improving yourself, that would always be beneficial, in my opinion.
Totally agree with you.
So how does the writing work with your like schedule? Like, as in, do you get to write as much as you want, or does being a teacher sort of block that from happening? Like, you can only do it at certain times?
Yeah, I can only do it at certain times, definitely, right? So I remember that when I started taking writing seriously, which was around the time I wrote Recebemos, I remember I could take a small chunk of my day, which was usually in the morning, because I used to teach afternoons and nights. So I would write in the morning and then work as a teacher in the afternoon and at night. And then it was pretty much like that for a very long time because I kept working afternoon and night shifts until 2018, right? And that's when I left Access. And at that time, I started working mornings and afternoons. And it became considerably difficult for me to write because I'm not someone who enjoys writing at night, and I usually came home tired right after a full day's work. And what was different was that before I could write in the afternoon when I was fresh and energized. So this was a challenging part of what happened, right, of the whole writing process. Now I have gotten used to it. So 2 years have gone by. I still work morning and afternoon shifts. But now I can write at night a little better, I have to say. And also I use my time when I'm on vacation. I tend to write a lot as well. And I tend to optimize my time this way. And the pandemic brought another element to it because due to the nature of the pandemic, well, as I work in São Paulo, I end up taking 3 hours to go and come back from work. So I usually take an hour and 10 minutes to go to work and then an hour and a half to come back. So because of the pandemic and with online learning and teaching, my day got a little bigger because I don't spend those 3 hours anymore. So I still wake up at the same time and I start writing. And at the time I finish, instead of facing traffic, I go back to writing. So in that sense, the pandemic, it's terrible to say this, that the pandemic helped. It didn't help anyone at all. But it ended up having this curious side effect to my work.
Yeah, because I was curious as to how conflicting your schedule as a writer may be with your schedule as a teacher. Because especially at top school in São Paulo, I was wondering like if it would conflict that much with your schedule, because teachers actually do have pretty busy jobs.
We do. We work with the students in class, and there's a bunch of things we have to prepare. There's a bunch of things we have to correct as well, many activities. And it's all part of the job, right? I'm not saying in the sense that I'm not complaining about any of that at all. And but yeah, it is conflicting. But I always tell people that my main job is being a teacher, who's also I am a teacher who's also a writer, right? I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. It's like I can't say I'm a writer who's also a teacher, not yet, at least. I'm a teacher who's also a writer, because at the end of the day, my real job, what pays my bills, is working as a teacher, and it's something I have always enjoyed doing. So if we're being practical, I haven't earned a single real from my book writing, because if I take into consideration how much I invested in this career and how much I've gotten in return, financially speaking, of course, it hasn't added up until now. I hope one day it does.
Well, this first part of our conversation was very cool, right? Can't wait for part 2, in which we'll be talking about the process of making a book. Stay tuned for part 2.